welcome you all to this afternoon's webinar. Today we're joined by Rebecca from Ashbury, and she'll be talking about Brexit, what has happened, major impacts and the future lookouts. Ashbury have been working with FDA for many years as one of our service providers. And they work with exporters on food label compliance and regulatory issues. And I'm sure Brexit issues will have been keeping Rebecca very busy for the last few years. So I'm going to hand over to Rebecca now. If you've got any questions, please use the chat box function, and we can answer questions for Rebecca after her presentation. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Mel. Thank you, and welcome everybody to this, what might seem like a quite dry subject, but I promise I'll try and make it sort of a little bit more interesting for you. Just to apologise, we did have some interactive parts, but they've sort of fallen away because I'm just too old to manage the function, to be honest. So yeah, pop any questions into the chat, please do, and we will, if you've got anything burning, of course, do shout out. At the moment, I can't actually see you, but do pop questions in the chat and we will collate them if we can't answer them immediately after the presentation. Okay, let's get going. Hopefully you can all see the screen quite well. So a little bit about us. Mel has introduced us to you, but here is just a little presentation on our sort of a main suite of things we do. And our bread and butter is really multi-category and multi-country regulatory support that we can offer. So just bear that in mind, bear us in mind. A little bit about me. Oh, I do hate this picture. I'm Rebecca Kaya. I've been with Ashbury for about 3 years. But before that, I did about 18 years in trading standards in the southeast of England. I covered imports, animal health, food standards, animal feed, product safety, market surveillance at borders. My last position was at the border control post at Southampton, managing port health staff and the trading standards department as well. My sins. And there's a bit less of me than there is now than there is in that picture. Okay, our agenda. I hope this sort of fits the frame for what you thought you are going to be listening to today. So we'll cover all these things in turn and look at some sort of real world examples of the impact that Brexit has had. And it's really been the breeding ground for a lot of new ways of working within the food and agri sphere. And we really hope that this session is going to leave you with a better understanding of all the sort of moving parts that sort of come together to form Brexit and what we have to work with now. And if you need a deeper dive, do let me know or Mel know, and we will look to do some follow-up sessions for your most pressing issues. So don't be shy, do speak up. Why are we talking about this? Well, Mel's alluded to it already, but it really does impact everything you do, directly or indirectly. So the 3 key points are up there for you. Impacts domestic business, export business, and one of the major things that we're seeing at Ashbury is the impact it's having on EU suppliers that you probably import your raw materials from or other. So it's very important. So a little quick quiz. We're not going to do it interactively, but we'll have to do it the old-fashioned way. So what I'm going to ask you is, what is made up of 3 countries and a province? So just shout out. Anyone? An odd question to ask, but it is really important and pertinent to what we're going to be discussing today. And why might that be important? Well, lots of reasons. So, of course, if you've got the middle one right, then give yourself a pat on the back. It is the United Kingdom, Scotland, Wales, England, and the province of Northern Ireland. Now, it's important because fundamentally, our colleagues in the EU don't get it. And the different terminologies have really made things quite messy. So just bear that in mind as we go through. What is the state of the nation today, and what challenges does it present to your industry today? Quite considerable, I'll bet. It's been a difficult and fast-moving couple of years. We're already going to break down those impacts for you, I hope. So illustrated here are really what I thought were really the main impacts. And we're going to break those down and look at those in terms of those drivers, regulatory drivers. Just bearing in mind that the UK is the only sovereign country to ever have left the EU. 47 years of experience has been lost within businesses in terms of import and export regulations and confidence in doing that really as well. So it's made things very different, but it's definitely brought a new and important dynamic for the UK. And these are illustrated here a little bit. We've got trade agreements. They are more possible, perhaps not always of the free trade kind, but we're up to about 70 trade agreements now. That does include some of the ones that are transposed that were already in place with the EU one. And I've just kind of illustrated this with a couple of comments that I've pulled out from social media and other to illustrate some of the issues. It is attributed to a Twitter user there. None of the 40 trade deals that the UK has signed has affected UK food standards. Not one, emphatically not one. Well, just hold on a second. I don't think he means food standards, because in my realm that means food labelling. He probably means food hygiene. So moving on, we've got the middle, we've got biosecurity. Indeed, the UK can independently decide on the risk presented by agri-food products and decide on how they control that border and those risks, but we have a slight problem, illustrated by Operation Ouzo, which was a multi-agency exercise in Dover not so long ago in October 22, which found staggering 2.5 tons of illegal pork products being imported for human consumption. And that presents quite a biosecurity threat to animal and human health. An illustration of that being what Dover Port Health had said to the Cabinet Office there on the slide. So we've also got product-specific standards. We've got the impetus for a divergence there within the United Kingdom. And when I say product standards, of course, I mean labelling requirements for goods in general. There is an ability for that to be different within the different countries of the UK. We must bear in mind. Some more impacts, perhaps more negative and generalised. The UK certainly fallen back again on the digitisation of import-export systems that we were anticipating to come forward slightly more quickly. But there are huge problems with retaining, recruiting and sort of training people to man those borders, illustrated by the slide before perhaps. And it's been a division sowing exercise, but in no doubts. Not all the UK voted to leave the EU, I suppose that's the message, and it's left us with a lot of tensions between the administrations. That's illustrated there on the right hand side, as you can see. Quite clearly Scotland did not want to leave the EU, and maybe they'll flex their muscle in terms of those laws that we might retain or not, because it's quite clear that they did not want to leave. Finally, EU businesses are probably no more prepared for what's coming down the line than we were really in 2021, and that's not helped by some of the deadlines being pushed back, and the sort of preparedness that we've put in place, or they've put in place, and then that's had to be withdrawn again. So yes, not helpful. This is my favourite, and I've titled this slide "The Brexit Wheel of Pain," and it really shows how the main influences interact or don't interact very well and rub against each other in terms of Brexit and the pieces of legislation or trade agreements, etc., that we've now got. So we'll explain them all in turn. We've got the UK Internal Markets Act of 2020, and that really gave the administrations the right to regulate goods within their own borders. And that doesn't interact very well with the Ruler Act on the bottom, which is the retained EU law bill, which we'll touch on later. Sorry, did I say bill? I mean act, because it's in place now. So we can see there in the inner circle some of the effects as well. So that control is slightly tempered by the Ruler Act, and we'll look at that. On the left, we've got the Northern Ireland Protocol, which was negotiated some time ago now, and of course has been updated very importantly by the Windsor framework. And we'll dive into that in some depth because food labelling is so affected by it. Lastly, we've got the EU UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement, to give it its title, which has given us our new trading arrangements with the EU. So those effects are outlined and how they interact a bit or don't, as I said, within the inner circle. It does create somewhat of a mess. But we'll move on to the Ruler Act, as it's known. The Retained EU Law and Revocation and Reform Act 2023, or Ruler, used to be known as something else. Anybody? The clues in the slide? The Bonfire Bill, that's right. Indeed. We'll look at that in some depth and the effects it has or doesn't. The Retained EU Law Revocation and Reform Act has come into play now. And going forward, one of the more significant impacts, as I said, is going to be the powers it grants to devolved administrations to either reinstate EU law as it was, or amend it and revoke it, replace it, etc. It's really in their power. And that would be in effect in just that administration and not in any of the others. So its effect could be dramatic. But in terms of those laws which are due to sunset, there's about 600 and they're outlined in the schedule. I'll quote Sir William Cash, because he said, without exception, the retained regulations detailed in the schedules are, and relating to, matters that are trivial, obsolete, and are not legally or politically important. As far as sort of border controls go for our sphere of work, there's nothing particularly to give us immediate concern in that schedule. There's just those 8 odd pieces of legislation which the FSA have outlined there, and some links there for you if you'd like to interrogate it a little bit further. So in itself, it doesn't have a direct impact, but it does have an impact, and we'll look at how that will affect us. This is really illustrated here. So this is the much lauded rule dashboard, which is an interactive tool you can look at to see some figures and charts, basically. That's all it is. But really what I've done here is grab from DEFRA's tranche of legislation they've got to deal with. And you can see the progress there in terms of them as a department reviewing, approving, amending, etc. those pieces of legislation that they had to deal with. You can see that it's 1,500, a little bit more than that. And you can see what they've remained unchanged, what they've managed to amend, or what has gone by the by, what's been repealed. But that progress, as you can see, is very slow. They've done about just a shade under 30% of that work. And the effect that's going to have is indirect, because it's going to stop any legislative reform or sort of new program for legislation in terms of agri-food law, because it's all going to have to originate from DEFRA. A little summary of Ruler for you. It's messy politically. I think that's what the message is. And on the point of striving for alignment, certainly, I think in general, the UK wants to do that. There's a tension there where the different administrations might want to go the other way. We'd like to see alignment, of course, because it means greater ease of goods across those borders. But I certainly think that striving is what's going to happen rather than any timely alignment. So we need to keep a close eye on that. In terms of, for example, food additives, we already know where there's been a slip and there wasn't alignment, and that did create some problems in relation to how to use various food additives. So watch out there. UK border controls, and I'm going to tie these together. The customs and regulatory borders. Regulatory borders being, of course, those that relate to the legal sort of requirements for goods to make them compliant, and customs borders being the ones that relate to taxes, duties, and reporting and recording of the movement of goods required for every country. So some of these slides are kind of in depth, and I will, as we go through, perhaps you'll want to come back to those. So I really do leave them with you as a resource, and we can just flag up questions in relation to them, because I'll go through them quite quickly. So the target border operating model was issued on the 29th of August this year. And I think what's happened is it's become very conflated with what's happening in GBNI, the rest of the world and the EU border. What does it apply to? Well, in essence, it does apply to everything. And in terms of GBNI, it's going to sort of bring everything together, hopefully. And of course, it controls customs controls and requirements for sanitary and phytosanitary controls. I'm sure all of you know what those are. I know AMIVET are here with us. They certainly know what those are in terms of sanitary controls. Yes, so that's controlling the animal health and human health risks, as I said, and all those customs and tax controls. The goals and timelines for the imposition of this have been pushed back quite a lot, as you probably are aware of. It's now 5 times this has been pushed backwards, as we really accept the fact we're not prepared for it. But the 2 key elements for us are really the new risk categories for products of animal origin that you'll see up there, especially when it comes to composite foods and knowing what they are and what's exempt from controls. I think for you, and us especially, this is what's brought us lots of questions from our EU colleagues and clients. When Brexit first hit off, we got so many questions about food business operator addresses. We're now seeing those in relation to these risk categories, because it's such a big departure from the way the EU handle things. So a little comment there that's just illustrating not everyone's so happy with it. As we said, these sort of timelines have been pushed. These are really goals now, because they've fallen away to some extent. But the key goals we need to be aware of are laid out in this extract, and it is taken directly from the document, the Border Target Operating Model. So do study it in depth. It is enormous and gave me quite a headache trying to tease out of it, but I quite like the graphics in it, actually. So if we look over here, we've got the listing of risks of commodities, which are sort of an intimation to that in the removal of certification for low risk goods. So we've got to know what those low risk goods are, or goods that don't require any certification. And that really shows the departure from the way the EU is handling things, because as it says there, 2.8 million types of goods, low risk imports compared with the EU approach. But what it means, it just makes navigating it very difficult. So we've got the Electronic Trade Documents Act, which has been enacted, and that really just opens the government coffers for the development of these simplified and digitized documents. It really, at the moment, it's just doing that. We haven't got a long way towards that yet, towards e-copies of documents and things. But it's changed the interpretation of some of those old shipping documents. So e-copies can now be included in the interpretation of used, possessed, or delivered, which is and will be extremely helpful, I hope. So that really ties in with the single trade window, should I say, which you can see up there in the top. But that it looks like it's an aspiration, a goal, but actually it's always been an obligation under Article 128 of the trade agreement that we instigate that, so that data can be shared with the EU in a sort of easy manner, easy and compliant manner, I guess. So we don't yet have a real date for introduction of that I know of. If you do, please let me know, but it's ongoing. Finally, safety and security declarations are mentioned down there, but they are still sort of a requirement, even from the GB2NI at the moment. Bringing us on to that, this graphic really is to do with UK borders, but does bear in mind the Northern Ireland and Windsor framework sphere, but we're going to detail that next. And it's certainly worth noting here, one of the most important points is that the Republic of Ireland is treated quite separately in some areas from the rest of the EU when it comes to these border controls. That's perhaps for obvious reasons, just exacerbating that tension. And at the top, what we've got is an important point I just feels getting glossed over. So, and you might ask yourself, what are qualifying Northern Ireland goods? It's really, really important that you know that if you are moving goods back and forward to, excuse me, NI. Later on down the line, understanding that if you're going to be moving into GB or out of GB and into, excuse me, NI and Republic, So qualifying Northern Ireland goods were outlined in 2020 in a piece of legislation, but that said that anything in free circulation in Northern Ireland counted as qualifying. However, that is changing, and food and animal feed products, and I quote, will need to be owned or processed in NI by a registered NI business in order to be considered qualifying NI goods. So watch out for that. Brings us on to the Windsor Framework, quite specifically. What exactly is the Windsor Framework? Well, it really is just a collection of joint decisions, position papers, joint statements, and here's a new one. I found something I found yesterday, a co-decision legislative file. I'm not sure what that means, but it's a suite of these negotiated between the EU and the UK over some time following Brexit. We'll move on to the real application of this. So this is an extract from the draft, I guess it's a co-decision legislative file from the EU, really outlining the scope of it and what it applies to. And there's a link there to that text for you, especially for food and food labelling. Article 5 and 6 is the critical part. It's just worth understanding and just noting that the Windsor Framework is a sort of adjunct and addition to the Northern Ireland Protocol, which remains pretty much in place, but they work together. The Northern Ireland Protocol being put in place by the sort of is a critical part of the withdrawal agreement. So just bear in mind that you may kind of have to know what that looks like, and you may have to know how that interacts with the Trade and Cooperation Agreement and the Windsor Framework. A bit more on the application and scope of it, because this seems to be, from our clients' questions, the nub, the interpretation really of the application and scope of what is an effective product, what counts as being touched by this, has been really, really difficult to tease out. It's changed. DEFRA's sort of advice, even from eminent folks, has sort of fluctuated a bit. And we can see this from the actual extract from that draft regulation or decision. It's not easy to read as to what it applies to. So retail goods, yeah, okay, that means pretty much everything that's sold. But there's a part of that as well. It says that the following goods that are delivered at distribution terminals. So how does that work in practicality? We're really just beginning to see how that works. And then we've got the other foods that are referred to, other than that referred to in those. So awfully complicated. Key part, and I know that on Friday there is a DEFRA webinar, is if you are producing composite products, that difficult area in between a slab of meat and something else which is just made out of plants, then do attend that webinar to see if it's helpful, because the distinguishing composite products has kept me in a job for about 2 years. So do make use of that. Some critical dates. I won't go into these too deeply because I'm conscious of time, but some critical dates for you to understand. And again, we'll go into those green lanes are and what they really mean very shortly. But one of the things you'll notice is that you've got this concept of risking products again, low risk, high risk. And then you've got some terminology like phase 1, phase 2. Phase 1 goods are the very high risk products. We'll see those illustrated shortly. They are, of course, meats and dairy, raw dairy products, if you like. Those that are really going to present that high animal risk, or health risk, sorry, and human risk. Mostly, I think it's important to know that a lot of these are based on animal health risks. And they're shown there for you a little bit, outlined here as to what they are, meat and dairy. There is a list, and DEFRA have published a list of what a phase 1 product looks like, and that's listed by commodity code. So again, look at that and understand what your commodity code for your product is, and it start to make a little sense, I hope. So one of the things that came up still this morning was in a meeting with DEFRA and some traders this morning was, what is this green lane? There are 2 green lanes. There's 2 schemes. How do they interact? What are they? I'm really hoping that this kind of adds some clarity to it. We've really worked hard to try and make it make sense. But ostensibly, I hope this illustrates it. If you have not at risk goods entering, they're not at risk of entering the EU, so a slightly different word there, and they're going from GB, we know what GB is now, into province of Northern Ireland. This is what it looks like. I hope it's clear. So you have 2 lanes. They're very separate. They're very different. At the moment, come October the 1st, actually the SBS green lane will be open for business. So bear in mind, SBS, that means our phytosanitary and sanitary controls. So this relates to agri-foods, retail agri-foods going into NI. So your retail packaged foods that are, and that's illustrated in that link up there, which is eligible foods. You can go and have a look, make sure that the terminology makes sense to you about what's eligible. It's packaged for the end consumer. It's going into a retail establishment in Northern Ireland, and it's a food basically. So please bear in mind that this is designed to illustrate the requirements for food and may get amended to include other things. But the SBS lane opens on October the 1st. In order to pass through that green lane and enter NI without export health certification and all that mess, you need to be labelling with not for EU, as we will see later, and you need to be a scheme member. So that scheme to enter that green lane is called the NI Retail Movement Scheme, NRMS. I'll try and say it properly. So that's the scheme in order to be able to utilise that lane. It's broader than Stanley. I guess that's the key, open to more businesses. The customs green lane is different and it's not open yet. It's going to be open a year later. At least we've only got Octobers to worry about, I suppose. And to pass through this green lane, which enables you to have simplified customs declarations, making the paperwork a lot less difficult. To utilise the benefits of the customs lane, you need to be a member of, remembering we're moving food, the NI Retail Movement Scheme, and the UK Internal Market Scheme. I'm not quite sure how more confusing they could have got the acronyms, to be honest. UKIMS, NRIMS. Well, no wonder people are confused. Even eminent publications I've looked at from the University of Belfast onwards and upwards haven't got this right. So really and honestly, I'm not surprised people find it very confusing. So I hope this has simplified it a bit. 2 schemes. If you're moving food, you wanted to make use of that kind of total green lane, you want to go through customs green lane, you want to go through SBS green lane. I hope that on the bottom right, you can see what you have to do. So an example with October fast approaching is we have found is the not for EU label. And this is a good example because it shows us a number of facets that we're going to delve into with country of origin label as well. But here is an example of a not for EU label, which has been appearing in NI. I nearly had a heart attack last week when somebody said, some deaf individual made a reference to something else being required on the label, like these products from somewhere else, from the United Kingdom or NI, may not be marketed outside. Da, da, da. Oh my goodness. Yes, I nearly had a heart attack. No, it's not for EU. That's all we need to put on. But we can see it up there illustrated as the requirement. You can see how simple it is with such a product where this is looks like a sort of pre-printed label, and it's only in NI. That's it may get more difficult outside. So this is for sale in NI. It's born in UK NI, reared in and slaughtered in. So you can see an example of those mandatory meat labelling post-Brexit indications of origin used in anger. And you can also see the identification mark, which is that mark in the oval, a post-Brexit mark there illustrated for you. Further impacts. what are the further impacts? I was interested to hear this morning, and I hadn't really got my head around what a general certificate was until this morning. So some of these important bits from the framework, the general certification. Now, apparently, we've got now some clarification that will be required. You can have one general certificate, which I'm still not entirely certain about these competent officers. They would have been food competent officers from trading stands. I'm not sure if that's still going to apply, rather than needing to be a vet. Vet, put your hands up, let me know. But you can have one general certificate for one load, and it does say vehicle. But something they put out this morning was that there was a reference to an equivalent enclosed structure. So I'm not sure whether that's going to affect this certification, and whether they'll accept something that's an equivalent enclosed structure rather than being a vehicle. So the posters for the shop aisles have been issued, a template issued that might want to appear in NI, where you've got a product that needs this, and that can be used as a template, and that's illustrated there. And looking at the two questions at the bottom, very important. Some questions that were asked this morning are still confusing people about the implications for rest of world goods. That's what I mean by ROW. Can they use the green lane? Which green lane? Let's stick to the SBS green lane here. No, I don't think they can. But a final question there was this morning as well was, what about Northern Ireland qualifying goods? And that question apparently was asked in Westminster, and Miss Coffey was unable to give any indication as to how that might happen. So some lookouts. A little brief on country of origin labelling then, because I hope you can begin to see the effects that these pieces of legislation, agreements, etc., are actually having in practicality. And one of them we've twisted our heads with, and we get lots of our clients worried about, is country of origin labelling. So, yes, potatoes, methinks. This is one that hit the headlines earlier. It's a little potato crisp that made a bit of a hash of it, quite frankly. Oh, that was dreadful, sorry. So what made this happen? Thinking back to our first quick quiz on what was made up of 3 countries and a province, maybe it was something to do with that, but ostensibly it's a piece of legislation that slipped into obscurity but did make massive changes. It's called the Food and Drink Miscellaneous Amendments Relating to Food and Wine Composition, Information and Labelling Regulations 2021. Oh, I made it through. And that introduced a replacement for EU non-EU with UK non-UK. But it didn't really change the necessity not to confuse consumers by giving contradictory information, and that's exactly what that does there. It conflicts. So you've got one statement saying it's 100% British potatoes. Well, not sure if that's really an origin. But it contains non-British potatoes. Got to be one or the other. And anyway, I would sincerely question, is that an origin? British, when we're talking about country of origin? Something to consider. Organic. So I'm going to touch on these very briefly because, oh dear, it's very, very difficult. But a little note on that when we're talking about origins. So with organics, of course, you've got the statement of agricultural origin. How is that affected? That's what we've got here under the 2 logos. It's interesting. You can see how much confusion it's causing, because only last week I reviewed a specification for a detergent, not a food, not organic food, and the supplier had kindly told me that it was a mixture of UK and non-UK agriculture. Wouldn't you know? So you can see how much confusion it does cause. So it's made a mess, Brexit, basically, of organic food certification in the UK, as we lost that mutual recognition, which was argued about for a little bit. And it made labelling quite difficult to tease out. But this is an example of how to do it correctly based on the origin of the primary goods. I don't actually know it, but let's suggest that it's correct. and to EU standards. That's how it should look. With organics, it's important to know that we do now have in-scope and out-of-scope organic products. So a thing to understand is whether you can certify it or not, where in terms of that origin label, it all ties in, of course. So what's in scope of the trade and cooperation agreement and can be certified, what's out of scope and can't be certified within GB as organic food or commodity. So in other words, I've used this to illustrate it. Anything that's not on that slide is out of scope. So I hope that that gives a little bit of a clearer picture. And I'll leave it there and leave organics for another day because it's a whole different kettle of fish. Up and coming, just to round it all off, the proposed scheme for accredited trusted traders is coming on board, and that ties in with the piece on digitisation. It's really looking to use the business's own records and electronic records to really make sure that that supply chain it doesn't keep needing certification and oversight, really. But rather interestingly, and they outlined this morning as well, the expression of interest has got a very short window, as you can see, 11th of September to the 6th of September. Well, I only knew about this yesterday. Don't know if anyone else knew about it, but it's in 3 modules. And if you want to interrogate that further, we can look at that. So certification, as it says on the tin, really, it's looking to make export health certification that's used from the point of origin of the goods, like from the manufacturing site, so they can be utilised all the way through without the need for recertification. Checks away from border model, well, that does what it says on the tin, really, looking at not carrying out checks on border control posts. And then we've got the journey assistance model, which is using those supply chain pieces of information and data to help. And we just touched on that, the Electronic Trade Documents Act, of course. Nothing more to say on that particularly, but a lookout I want everyone to be aware of are the deposit return schemes. So I've just made a note of that there. That has been delayed, and talking about that inter-UK bickering, that's been delayed because Scotland wanted to introduce it, and that would have required labelling only in Scotland. So we can see that impact in action there. So lastly, some key takeaways and watch outs for you just to round it up. So you can think about those a little. I hope you found it informative and interesting. And I hope we've got time for a few questions, Mel. I don't know, you can let me know what we do. I'll try and see if I can see you in a second. But certainly do remember, if you've got anything you want a deeper dive in, or you think that we can help you, please do get in touch.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's certainly complicated. I don't know if you would be able to, one thing I did make a note of was the NERMs and the UKIMs, whatever they were called. Yes. I don't know if you would be able to provide links to how people actually go about registering for those 2 schemes. That would be really useful.
Yep, can do. I shall make a note of that. Those outlets for registration, I do have them on me, so certainly can do that. Yeah, I
don't know if anybody's got anything they'd like to add or any questions. I know we've got Andrew on the call as well. He did mention something in the chat box.
Yeah, I see that. Thanks, Andy. Yeah. Auto signed by Def. Okay. No bets involved. Oh no. yes. So it's sort of vicariously by that. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. So I hope everyone can see that comment in that box.
Yeah, so if anybody has got anything they'd like to add, please do so now, or I will supply Rebecca's contact details and send around her slides as well, so people can have a look at the links and things that she provided as well. I'll probably send that round on Monday. Yeah, Sean, I see your hand is up. Would you like to unmute?
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Labour Party policy is to agree a veterinary equivalence agreement between UK and the EU. Could you give me your take on what the implications of that would be, please?
The golden egg. I'm just going to stop sharing so I can see people's faces. Is that okay, Mel? I hope everyone doesn't.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh yes, I can see people now. Thank you so much. That is really, it's been the goal, and I've asked that question myself. It's political is the answer. I think that really and honestly, it's unlikely. The last time I asked the vet about this or had the ear of anyone who could answer, it was really that it wasn't going to happen. Just forget it. I think it's really the stick to beat the UK with for leaving, in a way. I think the other reason that they're not interested in that, perhaps, or it'd be extremely difficult, is that it opens a bit of a floodgate, because it's so core. If you could open that equivalency up, what would be, it would open things up so much that the belonging to the club might not look so attractive to everybody else. So that's one of the reasons it appeared to be an absolute no. When and I put this sort of delicately, there was a time a year or two ago when DEFRA were much more open about making that direct sort of answer to a question when you had their ear, and it really seems of late that's not happening, and I don't know what that political reason is, but I think it's unlikely. Love to see it, but yeah.
I thought the EU offered that to the UK during the negotiations.
They kept that quiet if that did happen. I don't think, as far as I remember, any conversations I've had, it was not, if it was offered, I can't see how it would be actually. It would have come with such a high price. I don't know. Yeah, if anyone else can interject on that or knows any more about that, I'd be really interested to hear, because I did attend, I sort of out of the loop in terms of my job at Trading Standards, and I used to sit on the DEFRA local authority. It used to be a board you'd sit at for animal health, of course, because this is an animal health matter, and you would get good conversations with that, and I've lost the link to a lot of those sort of ears, but I don't think it was a flat out no every time I've sort of, why don't we just do that? I have brought it out before, but not to perhaps the right people. Yeah, triangular trade I can see there in the chat.
Yeah,
definitely, absolutely. So rest of world goods not processed in GB can currently go under Stanley, will generally not be able to go into the green lane. That's absolutely right. And you can see how political it is, because there were some exceptions. New Zealand lamb was pre-packed. I can't see the legislative reason for that, or what gives that, what regulation gives that, because everything is governed, all these official controls are governed by regulation. But yes, that's right, absolutely. New Zealand pre-packed lamb, an exemption. Go back to the slide, what I said, with what's exempt, what can go, what's a composite, etc. So important. So it says a general, do general certs apply to honey? Depends if it's processed, depends if it's in if it's put raw into a composite, poured in raw without being cooked in that product, then it might.
So just raw honey should be okay.
If you've just got raw honey, I think you I would hasten to give an answer until I saw to get in touch until I saw what you've got, and I don't really and honestly know quite enough yet about the general certification.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sure I'll put you in touch with Rebecca afterwards, and she can maybe take that offline and help you with the honey products.
I can see Andy replied there. His mic's not working, but no legislation or health reasons.
For the lamb, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone.
Sorry, can I just ask one more question, please? It's about the not for EU sale label. Could you just clarify that? Because I've heard conflicting things about what needs to be labelled and how?
Yeah, absolutely. It is the wording's now set. It is not for EU. So the high risk products, so that we are talking the meat, the dairy, etc., will need to be individually labelled. And what that means is actually on the retail pack, so that individual packet. So those high risk products must be individually labelled, like we saw. If you've got something that isn't counted as a high risk product, it will need to be labelled on its box. So let's say shelf, if you've got a multiple items in a shelf box, then that shelf box should be labelled. There's a lot of argument about when, because if we look at that piece of draft decision or whatever it's called, it says that it applies to retail goods in distribution, if you like. So the application of that could happen outside where let's say you've labelled up your products to go into GB, into NI, perhaps into the Republic as well. Where do you put that label? It can't obscure anything else. It could be a sticker, and it could just go on at some point down that line, not where you're actually labelling on a printed label. You could apply that. So long as it can't be removed, doesn't obscure anything else, it's pretty permanent, difficult to remove, then DEFRA have said that that's okay, which is good. So it's only those high-risk products that will ever need an individual label. The other products will need a shelf edge label and the poster in the store, which is, I don't know how many people are actually going to look at it. How is that going to facilitate the safe border? I don't know. I just don't know. Yeah, so in GB, I suppose the other application to that, and the other important bit, is when James cleverly has said that the intention is to bring that not for EU labelling for retail goods across the EU, roll it out across the UK, sorry, not the EU, roll it out across the UK countries. That's still an intention as far as I really am aware. And I'm not sure, well, it just presents so many problems that I don't know how that's going to work, because the intention, as I read it, was only ever that it applied to retail goods going across the border into NI. I can't read into anything other than a command paper, which kind of said, and Mr. Cleverly said, because of echoing what Andy said, philosophical reasons. I don't know how much real conversations he'd had with food businesses in order to sort of suggest it's a good idea, but that's the intention. Importantly, and within the slides, I think I have put that it's only high-risk products that when and if it comes into play in the rest of the UK, it's only high-risk products that are ever going to need an individual label. The rest can be on those shelf edge boxes or on or on the poster.
Thank you. Katie, have you got a question?
Yeah, I mean, it was really just to clarify that and what Sean says. So, sorry, Katie Burrow from Nairns. So we sell biscuits, so obviously into NI, you know.
I love them.
And so, forgive me, this is normally my colleague Catherine who's very au fait with this, but I just want to clarify. So we sell a packet of biscuits into Northern Ireland. We do not have to put not for EU on that box of biscuits. Nor do we have to put it on the case that it goes, you know, it packs in a case of 8 or whatever. So we're relying on Tesco, Dunn's to put some sort of label in the store or on the shelf. And so that's their responsibility, essentially, not ours. Am I understanding that correctly?
Oh, the list of what's exempt encompasses biscuits. Shelf
okay,
stable,
fine. So
non-composite. So you are free to go.
Oh, fab. Right, I'm out of here. Thanks very much. Thank you.
A good illustration of really those two key points. What's a composite? What's covered? What's exempt? And we can drill down, Katie, into that a little bit further if you want, just to put you into give you the actual bits. But I think on the eligible goods and in one of those other links that I've put in, I believe I've got that on there. It's not easy to find because they're just so low. I think the terminology is something like so low risk they don't present any animal health or human risk.
Okay,
and
that's great. That's helpful. Thanks very much. Thank you. That's a really helpful presentation. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks everyone. I think we're just running a little bit over, so I will, as I said, I'll send round the recording on Monday with all the links, etc. And Rebecca's contact details. Thank you, Rebecca, for your time, and everybody else today. Our next FDEA Export Operations webinar is going to be on protecting your intellectual property, and that's with Kilburn and Strode, and I think, can't remember the date off the top of my head, it's late October, early November time, but the details are on our website. If you would like to book that, please go ahead. It's free for FDA members. And yeah, just a little shameless plug for our network Export Awards, which the early bird tickets are currently on sale today and tomorrow. It will be full price as of Monday. So if you haven't booked your tickets, go ahead and do that now. And yes, thank you for joining us this afternoon. And like I said, recording on Monday. All right, thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Nice to see you all.
Bye. Bye.